Rome, a name that makes history tremble. From the heart of the most powerful empire that ever existed, only one symbol has stood for 2,000 years: the Colosseum, a masterpiece of architecture, a stage of blood, power, and Roman ingenuity. It was built without modern machinery, without gasoline or electricity, and without reinforced steel beams or computers to calculate the load. However, it remains the largest structure ever built of stone and brick in human history. It stands nearly 50 meters tall, roughly the height of a 15-story building. It stretches the length of 2 football fields, and at its peak, it could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 roaring spectators. But when you look at it today, you see a broken shell. You may wonder, why is half of the outer wall missing? How did they build it so quickly in less than a decade? And how could they flood the center of a stone building to stage real naval battles with warships?
The year was 64 AD. A devastating fire swept through Rome, reducing much of the city to ash. The people were terrified. They were homeless, and suspicion fell on one man: the Emperor Nero. Rumors whispered in the streets that Nero had started the fire himself just to clear space for his own vanity project. And honestly, the rumors seemed true. On the smoking ruins of the city center, Nero didn't build housing for the poor. He built himself a massive, luxurious palace called the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It was an insult to the people. It had artificial lakes, private forests, and a massive 100-foot bronze statue of Nero himself standing like a god in the entrance. But tyrants do not last forever. Nero's reign ended, and he took his own life. Rome fell into civil war. Out of that chaos, a new man rose to power, a tough, practical general named Vespasian. Vespasian was the founder of the Flavian dynasty. He was a man of the people, not a prince born in a palace. He knew that to keep his throne, he had to give Rome back to the Romans. He had to erase the memory of Nero.
So he made a decision that would change architecture forever. He looked at Nero's private artificial lake, a symbol of selfishness, and he ordered it to be drained. He said, "Where a tyrant once enjoyed luxury alone, now the people shall enjoy themselves by the thousands." He ordered a public arena to be built right there, a place for the people, a monument to Roman power, yes, but also a gift. It was a brilliant political move. It was propaganda written in stone. The year was 72 AD. The order was given, and the greatest construction project in history began. But having an idea is one thing, building it is another. Vespasian's engineers faced a nightmare. They were trying to build the heaviest stone structure in the world on top of a drained lake bed. The ground was soft, wet, and muddy. In modern construction, this is a recipe for disaster. If you build on soft soil, your building sinks and cracks.
So, how did they do it? They dug. They dug down nearly 20 feet to clear the sludge. Then, they laid down a donut-shaped foundation, a massive ring of concrete that was 40 feet thick. Now, we need to talk about Roman concrete. It is not like the stuff you buy at Home Depot that cracks after 20 years. The Romans used a special recipe. They mixed volcanic ash, called pozzolana, with lime and seawater. When this mixture dries, it bonds into a rock-solid material that actually gets stronger over time. This concrete ring acted like a floating raft. It distributed the incredible weight of the walls so the building wouldn't sink into the soft clay beneath. Once the foundation was set, the walls began to rise. But they didn't just use one type of stone. This is where the genius of Roman engineering really shines. They understood that a building needs to be heavy at the bottom and light at the top. For the base pillars, the parts that hold the most weight, they used travertine. This is a limestone so hard it feels like marble. They quarried it in Tivoli, about 20 miles away. They built a special wide road just to transport these massive blocks.
Think about the effort. 20 miles. No trucks, just ox carts and muscle. It is estimated that 100,000 tons of travertine were dragged to Rome for this project.
As the building went up, the materials changed. The middle walls were made of tuff, a softer, lighter volcanic rock. And the very top levels? They were made of brick and concrete. Heavy at the bottom, light at the top. It was a perfect balance of gravity and strength. If you look at the Colosseum, you see one shape repeated over and over again: the arch. The Romans didn't invent the arch, but they perfected it. Before this, buildings were mostly columns and beams, like the Greek temples. But a stone beam can only span a short distance before it cracks under its own weight. An arch is different. It channels the weight of the roof down into the pillars. It allows you to build higher, wider, and lighter. The Colosseum is essentially a honeycomb of arches, 80 arches on the ground level alone.
This design wasn't just for looks, it was for speed. The Colosseum was a modular construction site. Because every arch was identical, they could have different teams working on different sections at the same time. They didn't have to wait for one wall to be finished to start the next. It was like an assembly line. Hundreds of skilled masons, blacksmiths, and thousands of Jewish slaves brought back from the war in Jerusalem worked day and night. The scaffolding rose toward the sky, supported by timber beams. The air was filled with the sound of hammers, saws, and the shouting of foremen. In just 8 years, 8 short years, the structure was functionally complete. It seems impossible. Today, it can take 10 years just to approve the paperwork for a highway expansion. The Romans built the wonder of the world in less than a decade. When it was inaugurated in 80 AD by Vespasian's son, the Emperor Titus, the city went wild. The Colosseum was ready to welcome the world.
Let's step back in time. It is a hot summer day in 80 AD. You are a Roman citizen heading to the games. The first thing you notice is the organization. You might think crowd control is a modern invention, but the Romans had it down to a science. The Colosseum had 80 entrances. 76 of them were for the general public. And here is a detail that will blow your mind. Look closely at the ruins of the arches today. You can still see Roman numerals carved into the stone above the gates. Just like a modern stadium ticket, you had a designated gate number. You had a specific section. You had a specific seat. This system allowed 50,000 people to enter or exit the building in minutes. They called these exits vomitoria, not because people were sick, but from the Latin word meaning to spew forth, because the building would spew out crowds so quickly. Inside, the seating was strictly divided by social class.
Down front, practically smelling the sweat of the gladiators, sat the senators and the emperor. They had marble seats, cushioned for comfort. Behind them sat the knights and wealthy businessmen. Higher up were the ordinary Roman citizens, the men with the right to vote. And at the very top, in the steepest, hottest seats, sat the women and the slaves. They sat on wooden benches, far from the action. It was a mirror of Roman society. Everyone had a place, and everyone knew where they belonged. But there was one problem with an open-air arena in Italy: the sun. In August, Rome is a furnace. Sitting in stone bleachers would be unbearable. So the engineers created the velarium.
Imagine a convertible roof on a massive scale. The velarium was a gigantic canvas awning that stretched over the seating area, leaving only the center arena open to the sun. It was operated by a unit of sailors from the Roman Imperial Navy. Why sailors? Because handling the massive ropes and sails required experts in wind and rigging. When the sun moved, they moved the sails. It was ancient air conditioning, providing shade for the people while they watched the slaughter below. And what did they watch? The Colosseum was a theater of death. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a display of power. The emperor was saying, "I control nature. I control life. I control death." The day would start with the venetones, the beast hunts. The Romans imported animals from the farthest corners of the known world: lions from Africa, tigers from India, bears from Scotland, even elephants and rhinos. Most Romans had never seen these creatures. To see them was a marvel. To see them hunted and killed was a thrill. In the afternoon came the main event, the gladiators. These weren't just mindless killers.
They were the sports superstars of their day. Some were slaves, yes, but some were volunteers seeking glory. They trained in schools like the Ludus Magnus right next door. They had nutrition plans, mostly barley and beans to build a layer of protective fat. They had doctors. They had fans who bet fortunes on their victories. They fought with precise rules. A referee stood by, and when a gladiator fell, his fate was often left to the crowd and ultimately the emperor. We have all seen the movie gesture, thumbs up or thumbs down. While historians debate the exact hand signal, the power was real. The crowd roared, and a man lived or died based on their whim. But the most unbelievable spectacle happened in the early days of the Colosseum.
Ancient writers tell us that for the grand opening, the Emperor Titus did the impossible. He flooded the arena. How? We believe they removed the wooden floor of the arena. They used a system of sluice gates connected to nearby aqueducts and the sewer system. Millions of gallons of water poured into the basin. They launched flat-bottomed warships, real ships. They put thousands of condemned prisoners on board and forced them to fight a real naval battle. Cannons firing? No, but arrows, swords, and boarding parties. The water turned red. It was an engineering miracle. To waterproof a stone basin of that size, to fill it, and then drain it quickly enough to have gladiator fights the next day? It sounds like a myth. But recent archaeology suggests the drainage channels were real. They truly brought the ocean to the center of Rome.
However, the naval battles didn't last long. A few years later, under the Emperor Domitian, the Colosseum was upgraded. They realized they needed something more complex than water. They needed a backstage. So they built the Hypogeum. This is the underground labyrinth you can see today. If you visit Rome now, you look down into a maze of broken walls. But back then, this was covered by a wooden floor scattered with sand. The word arena actually comes from the Latin word harina, meaning sand. Sand used to soak up the blood. Beneath that floor was the beating heart of the show. It was dark, hot, and smelled of wild animals and fear. Hundreds of slaves worked down there in cramping conditions. But the machinery was brilliant. They built a system of elevators. Yes, elevators in the 1st century. Archaeologists have found the sockets for 28 distinct lifts. Here is how it worked. A lion would be driven into a wooden cage underground. 8 strong men would push a massive winch, walking in a circle. This winch pulled ropes through a series of pulleys. Slowly, the heavy cage would rise toward the ceiling of the basement. At the top, a trap door in the arena floor would open. The cage door would slide up, and suddenly, whoosh, a hungry lion would appear seemingly out of nowhere in front of the gladiator. They could make scenery appear too. Artificial trees, rocks, entire sets would rise from the ground. One minute the arena was flat sand, the next it was a forest for a hunt. It was a magician's trick on a colossal scale, designed to keep the crowd on the edge of their seats. For nearly 500 years, the games continued, but nothing lasts forever. As the Roman Empire began to crumble, the money ran out. The cost of importing lions and feeding gladiators was too high. Christianity took over, and the bloody games were eventually banned. The last gladiator fight happened around 435 AD. The last beast hunt was in 523 AD. Then, the silence fell. People often ask, what happened to the other half of the Colosseum? Everyone knows that iconic shape, the slanted, broken edge. Why does it look like a bite was taken out of it? It wasn't a war, it wasn't a bomb, it was a combination of geology and robbery. Remember that foundation, the concrete ring? Well, the south side of the Colosseum was built over the deepest part of that old artificial lake. The ground there was softer, more unstable. In the year 1349, a massive earthquake struck Rome. The northern side, built on solid ground, held firm, but the southern side, sitting on that soft clay, shook violently. The outer wall collapsed. Thousands of tons of stone crashed to the ground. But the Romans didn't rebuild it. They recycled it. By the Middle Ages, the Colosseum wasn't seen as a monument. It was seen as a quarry, a free hardware store. Why cut new stone when there is a pile of perfectly shaped travertine right there? The fallen stones were carted away to build palaces, hospitals, and churches. Even parts of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican contain stones stolen from the Colosseum. The iron clamps that held the blocks together, they were gouged out and melted down to make weapons. You can still see the pockmarks, the holes in the walls, where scavengers dug out the metal.
The Colosseum was eaten alive by the city it served. For centuries, it was abandoned. It was used as a fortress for a warlord family. It was a shelter for the homeless. It was even a botanical garden because rare seeds from exotic animals' fur had taken root in the soil. It wasn't until the 1700s that the popes stepped in. They declared the site sacred, honoring the Christian martyrs who, according to tradition, died there. They stopped the looting. They built support walls to hold up the crumbling edges. If not for the church, the Colosseum might have disappeared entirely. Today, the Colosseum stands quiet. Cars and Vespas zoom past it on modern asphalt. Millions of tourists walk through its arches every year, snapping photos on their phones, standing in the exact spots where emperors and slaves once stood. It is a ghost of its former self. The white marble seats are gone, the statues are gone, the velvet awning is long decayed, but the skeleton remains.
When you look at the Colosseum, don't just see a ruin. See the genius of the engineers who poured that concrete foundation that is still holding 2,000 years later. See the organization of the numbered gates that we still use in our stadiums today. See the ambition of a civilization that believed it could tame the world, flood a stage, and build a mountain out of stone. It is a monument to human greatness and also to human cruelty. It reminds us of what we are capable of building and what we are capable of destroying. The poet Byron once wrote, "While stands the Colosseum, Rome shall stand, and when Rome falls, the world." So far, the giant is still standing. What do you think? Would you have been brave enough to step into that arena, or would you have been safe in the stands? If you enjoyed this journey back in time, we have so many more stories to uncover, from the secrets of the pyramids to the Great Wall of China. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter of history.